The message came from the stars on a Tuesday morning when Park Hyun was drinking his third cup of coffee and reviewing military reports from the Mars colonies. The signal was unlike anything Earth had ever received before, and it made every scientist on the planet drop what they were doing and stare at their screens in wonder. The transmission was clean and clear and carried mathematical patterns that could only mean one thing: someone out there was trying to talk to them. Dr. Lee Nara was in her lab at Seoul University when the call came through. She had been studying the quantum biological processes that allowed certain Earth bacteria to survive in space when her assistant burst through the door with news that would change everything. The signal contained coordinates and what appeared to be an invitation written in basic mathematical concepts that any spacefaring civilization would understand. The Galactic Council had been watching Earth for some time now, though the humans did not know this. When Earth's first faster-than-light transmission reached their monitoring stations, the Council members were both impressed and concerned. Most species took between 500 and 1,000 years to develop from basic spaceflight to FTL, communication. Humans had done it in less than 200 years, which was either very impressive or very dangerous. Ambassador Veltar of Centauri Prime was assigned to handle the first contact protocols. He was a tall being with blue skin and 4 arms who had guided dozens of species through their first meeting with galactic civilization. Most of the time, it was routine work. Young species were usually frightened and overwhelmed by the scope of the galaxy and grateful for guidance. They needed careful handling and lots of reassurance that the big scary universe was actually quite safe and orderly. The Council decided to follow standard procedure. They would send a diplomatic vessel to collect 2 representatives from Earth and bring them to Council Station Omega for the traditional welcome ceremony. The humans would undergo the usual tests to determine their level of civilization and their potential contribution to galactic society. Then they would be given a small territory to govern and gradually introduced to the larger community over the course of several decades. Earth's governments spent 3 weeks arguing about who should represent humanity to the stars. The Americans wanted to send their best diplomat and a Nobel Prize-winning scientist. The Europeans suggested a joint delegation. The Chinese proposed their leading physicist and a military advisor. The Russians insisted on sending someone who could handle any kind of negotiation. In the end, it was the Koreans who suggested something different. Park Hyun had served in the Korean Special Forces before becoming a military attaché and later a peacekeeper on Mars. He had experience dealing with hostile environments and unknown situations. More importantly, he was calm under pressure and good at reading people even when those people were very different from himself. He spoke 4 languages fluently and had a degree in engineering along with his military training. Dr. Lee Nara was chosen for her scientific credentials, but also for her ability to explain complex ideas in simple terms. She had discovered the quantum processes that had accelerated Earth's technological development, and she understood better than anyone how human biology worked in extreme conditions. She was also patient and curious, which seemed like good qualities for meeting aliens for the first time. When the Council ship arrived in Earth orbit, it looked like nothing humans had ever built. The vessel was smooth and silver and seemed to bend light around itself in ways that hurt to look at directly. Veltar sent a polite message requesting permission to take the human representatives aboard and promising to return them safely within 1 standard galactic week. Park Hyun and Lee Nara met at the International Space Station, where they put on the best environmental suits Earth could provide. The suits were bulky and primitive compared to what the Council species used, but they worked well enough for human needs. Neither of them had ever been in space for more than a few days, but they were both excited rather than nervous about the journey ahead. When they were transported aboard the Council ship, Veltar was waiting to greet them in the docking bay. He had prepared a speech about the wonders of galactic civilization and the great honor being bestowed upon their species, but the humans seemed more interested in examining the walls and asking questions about how the artificial gravity worked. Park Hyun walked around the bay with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to new and potentially dangerous situations. He tested the gravity by jumping slightly and nodded with approval when he landed normally. Lee Nara was running her hands along the walls and asking if she could take readings with a small device she had brought from Earth. Veltar offered them more sophisticated environmental suits, but Park Hyun politely declined, saying their current equipment would be fine for a short trip. When asked about atmospheric requirements, Lee Nara said anything close to a nitrogen-oxygen mix would work perfectly. Most species required very specific atmospheric compositions and often needed completely different gas mixtures just to survive. The Council ship began its journey to the station, and Veltar settled in to give his passengers the standard briefing about galactic civilization. He explained that the Council governed 847 worlds and maintained peace across thousands of star systems. He described the great cities and the technological wonders they would see. He talked about the ancient wisdom of the elder species and the careful guidance given to younger civilizations. Park Hyun listened politely and asked practical questions about trade routes and defense systems. Lee Nara wanted to know about the biological diversity of different worlds and how various species had adapted to their environments. Neither of them seemed particularly impressed by the scale of galactic civilization, which puzzled Veltar since most species were overwhelmed by their first glimpse of how large the universe really was. During their first meal together, Veltar learned more about Earth than he had expected. The humans described their planet casually, as if discussing the weather. Park Hyun mentioned that Earth had temperature variations ranging from -89 degrees to +70 degrees Celsius, which would kill most Council species instantly. Lee Nara talked about the radiation levels in Earth's upper atmosphere as if they were mildly interesting rather than completely lethal. When Veltar expressed concern about these extreme conditions, the humans seemed confused by his worry. Park Hyun explained that humans lived comfortably at all kinds of altitudes and temperatures and that their military training included surviving in environments that would challenge their equipment. Lee Nara added that Earth's children learn to swim by being placed in deep water and that most human recreational activities involved some element of physical risk. The conversation continued over the next 2 days as they traveled toward the Council station. Veltar learned that humans shared their planet with creatures that could easily kill them and that they considered this normal and even interesting. Park Hyun described bears and sharks and venomous snakes as if they were household pets. Lee Nara explained that human medicine involved deliberately exposing people to diseases in small doses to build immunity. By the 3rd day, Veltar was beginning to suspect that Earth might not be the peaceful garden world he had assumed. When he asked about Earth's classification in their databases, Park Hyun and Lee Nara looked at each other in confusion. They had never heard anyone classify planets by danger levels before. When Veltar explained that most civilized worlds were carefully maintained to provide safe and comfortable environments, the humans seemed genuinely surprised. As Council Station Omega came into view, Veltar realized he might need to revise his assumptions about humanity. The station orbited a neutron star in what the Council considered a safely remote location. When he pointed out the exotic stellar phenomena, the humans pressed against the viewing ports with obvious excitement rather than the fear he expected. Park Hyun commented that it was beautiful, and Lee Nara started taking measurements with her instruments. Veltar began to wonder if the Council might have underestimated these particular younglings. Council Station Omega was the largest artificial structure Park Hyun and Lee Nara had ever seen, and it hung in space like a metal moon beside the spinning neutron star that provided its power. The station was home to representatives from hundreds of worlds, and it had been designed to accommodate every known form of intelligent life in the galaxy. Veltar explained that the artificial gravity was set to .3 standard, which was considered heavy gravity suitable for most species, when their transport docked at the station. Veltar offered the humans mobility assistance devices that would help them move in the higher gravity environment. Most species needed these aids to function properly in anything above .2 standard gravity. Park Hyun and Lee Nara politely declined the equipment and walked off the transport with fluid, easy movements that suggested they were actually more comfortable in the heavier gravity than they had been on the ship. The docking bay was filled with beings from dozens of different worlds, and Park Hyun found himself studying their various forms with professional interest. Some were tall and thin like Veltar, while others were short and broad. Several species seemed to be made of crystalline materials, and one group appeared to be composed entirely of organized gas clouds contained in mechanical suits. Lee Nara was fascinated by the biological diversity and kept asking Veltar questions about how different species had evolved. High Counselor Mordek was waiting to greet them in the main reception area. He was an impressive figure even by galactic standards, with a body that resembled a large praying mantis covered in metallic plates. His four eyes moved independently as he examined the human visitors, and his translator device spoke in careful, precise tones when he welcomed them to the station. The traditional trials of civilization were held in a special chamber designed to test the capabilities of new species. These tests had been developed over thousands of years, and they provided a reliable way to measure the potential contribution of each new member of galactic society. Most species found the trials challenging but not impossible, and success in all three areas was required for full council membership. The first trial was a test of physical endurance. The candidate had to survive in 0.5 standard gravity for 1 full hour while performing basic tasks like walking, climbing, and manipulating objects. The test chamber was monitored carefully to ensure no permanent damage occurred, and medical teams stood ready to intervene if a candidate showed signs of distress. Park Hyun entered the chamber and began the test with quiet confidence. The increased gravity seemed to have no effect on him at all, and he completed the required tasks with smooth, efficient movements. After 20 minutes, he was still showing no signs of fatigue. After 30 minutes, the monitoring technicians began checking their equipment to make sure it was working properly. Park Hyun finished all the required tasks in 12 minutes, and then asked politely if there was a more challenging version available. The second trial tested mental acuity under stress. Candidates were presented with complex mathematical theorems and asked to solve them while dealing with distracting light sounds and environmental changes. Most species found this difficult because the stress made it hard to concentrate on abstract problems. The test was designed to measure both intelligence and emotional stability under pressure. Lee Nara sat in the testing chamber and began working on the mathematical problems with obvious enjoyment. The flashing lights and changing temperatures seemed to have no effect on her concentration, and she solved the theorems methodically while taking notes about the interesting engineering solutions used in the chamber's construction. She finished the test in half the allotted time and asked if she could examine the equipment more closely. The third trial was a diplomatic simulation where candidates had to negotiate peace between two hostile factions. The test used holographic. Representatives of actual historical conflicts and candidates were judged on their ability to find creative solutions that satisfied both sides. Most species approached this test with careful diplomatic protocols and tried to find compromise positions that everyone could accept. Both humans took the diplomatic test and both succeeded, but their solutions were unlike anything the Council had seen before. Park Hyun suggested a military doctrine he called mutually assured destruction, where both sides would be too afraid to fight because the consequences would be too terrible. Lee Nara proposed an economic solution where the hostile factions would become so dependent on trade with each other that war would be economically impossible. The Council observers spent several hours discussing these solutions because they involved concepts that had never been considered in galactic diplomacy. The idea of using fear as a peacekeeping tool was particularly disturbing to species that had spent millennia trying to eliminate violence from civilized society. The notion that economic dependence could prevent war was equally strange to beings who saw trade as a pleasant bonus rather than a survival necessity. After the trials were completed, the humans were invited to attend a cultural exchange dinner where they could meet representatives from many different worlds and sample the finest foods that galactic civilization had to offer. The dining hall was a magnificent space with tables, arranged to accommodate every possible body type and atmospheric requirement. Special fields maintained different environmental conditions around each table so that all species could dine in comfort. Park Hyun and Lee Nara were seated at a table with several council members who were curious about Earth culture. The meal began with traditional greeting ceremonies from various worlds, and then progressed through a carefully planned menu of exotic delicacies. Each dish had been selected to showcase the unique culinary achievements of different civilizations. The humans tried everything that was offered to them with polite interest and genuine curiosity. They sampled foods that should have been toxic to carbon-based life forms and tasted dishes that most species found too extreme to handle. When crystalline beings offered them mineral compounds that were essentially edible rocks, Park Hyun and Lee Nara chewed thoughtfully and complimented the interesting texture. When gas-based species shared atmospheric flavors that were meant to be inhaled rather than eaten, the humans found ways to appreciate the experience. Ambassador Veltar asked. About Earth cuisine, and Lee Nara explained that humans commonly ate what she called the chemical defense systems of plants. She was referring to spices and herbs, but the way she described them made it sound like humans deliberately consumed poisonous substances for pleasure. She mentioned fermented foods, which she described as controlled decomposition of organic matter, and explained that humans enjoyed the reproductive organs of plants as sweet treats. Park Hyun added that many human cultures considered insects to be delicious, and that some of the most prized foods on Earth were actually dangerous to obtain. He described deep-sea fishing, where humans would risk their lives to catch creatures that lived in the crushing depths of Earth's oceans. He mentioned that human hunters would track dangerous predators through hostile terrain just to obtain meat that could easily be produced artificially. The conversation turned to human entertainment, and the council members learned that humans enjoyed something called extreme sports. Lee Nara tried to explain activities like mountain climbing, where humans would scale vertical rock faces using minimal equipment just for the thrill of reaching the top. Park Hyun described skydiving, where humans would throw themselves out of perfectly functional aircraft and trust their lives to fabric parachutes. When asked about human art and literature, the humans described stories that were designed to frighten and disturb the audience. They explained that human children were told bedtime stories about monsters and dangers, and that adult humans paid money to watch fictional presentations of terrible disasters and frightening creatures. The concept of entertainment based on fear was completely alien to most council species who preferred art that was soothing and harmonious. Dr. Kethamore was a scientist from Andromeda who existed as an organized gas cloud contained in a sophisticated mechanical suit. He was fascinated by human biology and asked detailed questions about how their bodies functioned. Lee Nara explained that humans had redundant organ systems and could survive the loss of significant body parts. She mentioned that human bones would heal themselves after being broken, and that human skin would regrow after being damaged. The dinner conversation continued late into the station's night cycle, as more council members joined the table to hear about Earth culture. They learned that humans regularly exposed themselves to radiation from their sun for pleasure, and that human medicine involved deliberately cutting people open to repair internal damage. They heard about human sports where the objective was to physically overcome opponents through strength and skill, and where injuries were considered an acceptable risk. As the evening ended, Veltar filed his preliminary report on the human visitors. He noted that they seemed remarkably adaptable and resilient, but he was beginning to suspect that Earth might be more dangerous than the Council had assumed. The casual way the humans discussed extreme conditions and violent activities suggested that their homeworld might not be the peaceful garden planet that most civilized species called home. The Great Chamber of the Galactic Council was a marvel of engineering that could accommodate representatives from 847 different worlds all at the same time. The massive dome stretched upward until it disappeared into artificial clouds, and the seating areas were arranged in concentric circles that rose like amphitheater steps toward the curved walls. Each section had been designed for specific types of beings with different atmospheric requirements, gravitational needs, and communication methods. Park Hyun and Lee Nara sat in the newcomer section near the center of the chamber, where they could be easily seen and heard by all the council members. The formal session began with ancient ceremonies that had been practiced for thousands of years and included traditional greetings in dozens of different languages and communication formats. Some species communicated through sound, while others used light patterns, chemical releases, or electromagnetic fields. High Counselor Mordek called the session to order using the ceremonial gavel that had been carved from a meteorite older than most civilizations. His translator device announced that the Council would now consider the application of the species, known as humans from the planet called Earth in the Sol system. The chamber fell silent as hundreds of different beings focused their attention on the two small figures sitting calmly in the newcomer seats. The formal evaluation process began with military assessment led by Captain Zin Ara of the Vegan Defense Forces. She was the impressive reptilian being with scales that shifted color according to her emotional state, and she had served in the Council military for over 2 centuries. Her role was to determine whether the new species represented a threat to galactic peace and stability. Captain Zinara asked Park Hyun to describe his species' approach to conflict resolution. The question was standard, and most species responded with descriptions of peaceful negotiation, diplomatic protocols, and conflict avoidance strategies. Captain, Zinara expected to hear about meditation councils, arbitration systems, and perhaps some mild forms of economic pressure. Park Hyun stood and began explaining human military doctrine with the calm professionalism of someone who had spent his career studying warfare. He described the concept of total war, where entire civilizations would mobilize all their resources to destroy their enemies completely. He explained guerrilla warfare, where small groups of fighters would use hit-and-run tactics to defeat much larger organized armies. He mentioned that humans had been fighting continuously for thousands of years and had developed increasingly efficient methods of killing each other. The chamber began to stir uneasily as Park Hyun continued his explanation. He described weapons of mass destruction that could render entire planets uninhabitable and explained that every major human government possessed such weapons but had chosen to restrict their use through mutual agreements. He mentioned that human military doctrine included concepts like acceptable losses, where commanders would deliberately sacrifice some of their forces to achieve strategic objectives. When Captain Zinara asked about Earth's current military capabilities, Park Hyun explained that every human government maintained what he called citizen soldiers. These were ordinary civilians who had received combat training and could be mobilized quickly in case of emergency. He estimated that Earth could field armies numbering in the hundreds of millions if necessary, and that human industrial capacity could be converted to military production within months. The scientific evaluation was conducted by Dr. Kethmore, whose gaseous form rippled with what might have been anxiety as he asked Lee Nara to describe human technological development. This question was also routine, and most species described careful, methodical research guided by safety protocols and ethical considerations. Scientific advancement was usually a slow, careful process that took centuries to achieve significant breakthroughs. Lee Nara explained that humans had developed their technology through what she called aggressive experimentation. Human scientists regularly exposed themselves to radiation chemicals and extreme conditions in order to understand how these forces affected living tissue. She described how human medicine was based on controlled poisoning, where doctors would give patients toxic substances in carefully measured doses to fight disease. She mentioned that human researchers had deliberately infected themselves with dangerous diseases to test potential cures, and that human space exploration involved sending people into the vacuum of space strapped to controlled explosions. She explained that humans had learned to split atoms by building increasingly powerful devices designed to tear matter apart at the molecular level until they achieved the desired result. Dr. Kethmore asked about human safety protocols, and Lee Nara described how humans tested new technologies by using them on volunteers who understood they might be injured or killed in the process. She explained that human research ethics required informed consent, but allowed individuals to accept almost any level of risk if they chose to do so. She mentioned that humans had developed most of their medical knowledge by performing surgery on living subjects, including themselves. The cultural analysis was led by Ambassador Veltar, who was beginning to understand that his initial assessment of humanity might have been incomplete. He asked the humans to describe what motivated their species' behavior and what drove their civilization forward. This question usually revealed the philosophical and ethical foundations that guided a species' development. Park Hyun and Lee Nara looked at each other and began describing human culture in terms that made the council members increasingly uncomfortable. They explained adventure tourism, where humans would pay money to visit dangerous locations and participate in potentially fatal activities just for the excitement. They described competitive sports where humans would engage in organized combat, for the entertainment of spectators who enjoyed watching physical violence. Lee Nara talked about the human exploration instinct, which she described as a compulsive need to discover what lay beyond the next horizon, even when that exploration involved significant risk of death or injury. She mentioned that humans had explored every dangerous environment on their planet, including the deepest oceans, the highest mountains, and the most hostile climates, simply because those places existed and humans wanted to see them. Park Hyun described human literature and entertainment, which was filled with stories about monsters that humans had created specifically to frighten themselves. He explained that human children were raised on tales of dangerous creatures and scary situations, and that adult humans enjoyed fictional presentations of disasters, wars, and supernatural threats. The concept of entertainment based on fear and violence was completely foreign to most council species. As the questioning continued, the council members began to realize that they were not dealing with a typical young civilization seeking guidance and protection. The humans seemed to view danger as entertainment, conflict as sport, and survival as an ongoing challenge to be enjoyed rather than a problem to be solved. Their casual attitudes toward violence and their comfortable relationship with risk suggested that they had evolved in an environment completely unlike the safe, controlled worlds that most civilized species called home. The session was temporarily adjourned when Lee Nara mentioned that human children learned to swim by being placed in deep water and expected to figure out how to stay alive on their own. She explained that this was considered normal child development, and that human parents regularly exposed their offspring to controlled dangers in order to teach them survival skills. Ambassador Veltar called for a recess while the council members tried to process what they had learned about humanity. The implications were disturbing and unprecedented in the council's long history of first contact protocols. They had never encountered a species that seemed to thrive on the very conditions that most civilizations spent their entire development trying to eliminate. High Counselor Mordek gathered the senior council members in a private chamber to discuss their preliminary findings. Captain Zin Ara reported that human military capabilities exceeded anything the council had seen from a species at their level of technological development. Dr. Kethmore noted that human scientific methods violated most civilized safety protocols, but seemed to produce remarkably rapid advancement. Ambassador Veltar added that human culture appeared to be based on competition, conflict, and risk-taking, in ways that suggested they might not be suitable for peaceful integration into galactic civilization. The council faced an unprecedented decision about how to handle a species that seemed to be naturally suited for warfare rather than diplomacy. Park Hyun and Lee Nara waited in the visitor area, completely unaware that they had accidentally terrified the most powerful governing body in the galaxy. They were excited about the advanced technologies they had observed and eager to continue learning about the fascinating diversity of galactic civilization. They discussed the interesting engineering solutions they had seen and made plans for. Their reports to Earth about the remarkable opportunities that awaited humanity among the stars. The council prepared to reconvene for what might be the most important decision in their long history. The emergency session of the council's scientific committee convened in a secure chamber deep within the station where their discussions could not be overheard by the human visitors. Dr. Kethmore had spent the recess period analyzing all available data about Earth and its inhabitants, and his findings were more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. The gaseous being's containment suit flickered with agitation as he began his presentation to the assembled xenobiologists and military analysts. The environmental assessment revealed that Earth was not the garden world the council had assumed it to be. Dr. Kethmore displayed holographic charts showing Earth's atmospheric composition, temperature ranges, and radiation levels. The data indicated that Earth's gravity was 2.3 times the council standard, which meant that humans had evolved in crushing conditions that would kill most civilized species instantly. The atmospheric pressure readings showed variations that would cause explosive decompression in beings not specifically adapted to such extremes. Earth's temperature variations ranged from minus 89 degrees Celsius in some regions to plus 70 degrees in others, with seasonal changes that would represent catastrophic climate disasters on any properly maintained world. The radiation exposure levels in Earth's upper atmosphere exceeded the maximum safe limits for most known life forms, and yet humans regularly traveled to those altitudes in primitive aircraft for routine transportation. Dr. Kethmore explained that Earth's weather systems included phenomena that the Council classified as natural disasters, but which humans seem to consider normal seasonal variations. These included electrical storms with enough energy to power small cities, hurricanes with wind speeds that could demolish most Council architecture, and seismic events that regularly reshaped the planet's surface. The humans lived with these conditions daily and had built their entire civilization around surviving them. The biological analysis was even more shocking than the environmental data. Human anatomy showed clear evidence of evolution in extreme conditions, with bone density approximately 3 times that of similar-sized beings from normal worlds. Human muscle structure suggested adaptation to high-gravity environments, and their cardiovascular system was designed to function under pressure variations that would cause most species to lose consciousness or die. The human immune system was particularly disturbing to Council scientists because it seemed designed to fight off constant biological threats. Most civilized species had evolved in carefully controlled environments where disease was rare and easily managed. Humans had developed immune responses that suggested they were under continuous attack from hostile microorganisms and had learned to survive by maintaining a constant state of biological warfare within their own bodies. Human pain tolerance was approximately 50 times the council average, which meant they could continue functioning under conditions that would incapacitate most other beings. Their healing rates suggested that physical trauma was a regular part of their existence, and their bodies had adapted to repair damage quickly and efficiently. The presence of redundant organ systems indicated that humans regularly lost body parts but continued to survive anyway. The psychological profile was equally troubling because it revealed that humans actively sought out dangerous situations for pleasure and entertainment. Most species developed behavior patterns designed to avoid risk and maintain safety, but humans seemed to have evolved the opposite response. They were attracted to danger and viewed survival challenges as recreational activities rather than threats to be avoided. Captain Zinara presented the military analysis which showed that humans had never achieved global peace despite having the technology to destroy their entire planet multiple times over. Human history was a continuous record of warfare with increasingly sophisticated weapons and tactics developed through thousands of years of constant conflict. The concept of total war, where entire civilizations would mobilize all resources to destroy their enemies, was unknown among council species. The most disturbing aspect of human military doctrine was their acceptance of casualties in pursuit of strategic objectives. Most civilized species considered any loss of life to be a failure of planning and would abort missions rather than accept preventable deaths. Humans routinely planned operations where they expected significant losses and considered these acceptable if the mission succeeded. Human weapons technology had developed along lines that the Council found deeply troubling. They had created devices capable of destroying entire planets and had distributed these weapons among multiple competing governments. The fact that they had chosen to limit the use of such weapons through negotiated agreements rather than simply not building them in the first place suggested a fundamentally different approach to survival than most species had developed. The industrial capacity analysis revealed that human manufacturing could be converted from civilian to military production within months and that their population could support armies numbering in the hundreds of millions. Every human government maintained reserve forces of trained civilians who could be mobilized quickly in case of emergency. The concept of citizen soldiers was unknown among species that had achieved true civilization. Dr. Kethmore concluded his presentation with the formal classification that would change everything. According to Council standards, Earth qualified as a Class 12 death world with multiple environmental hazards that exceeded the survivability limits for most known life forms. Humans were not a young civilization seeking guidance, but rather apex predators from one of the most hostile environments in the galaxy who had somehow achieved spaceflight while retaining all their predatory instincts. The implications of this classification sent waves of shock through the assembled council members. Class 12. Death worlds were studied from a safe distance, but never visited because they were considered too dangerous for civilized beings. The fact that an intelligent species had not only survived on such a world, but had thrived there and developed advanced technology was unprecedented in galactic history. Ambassador Veltar reviewed his transport logs and realized that every assumption about human physiology had been wrong. The environmental suits they wore were not advanced life support systems, but rather minimal protection against minor atmospheric differences. Their comfortable movement in heavy gravity was not adaptation, but rather relief from the crushing conditions of their home world. Their casual attitudes toward the neutron star had not been ignorance, but rather genuine appreciation for a relatively mild stellar phenomenon. The Council's xenopsychologists added their analysis of human behavior patterns and cultural development. Humans had evolved entertainment based on simulated danger and conflict, which suggested that their normal environment was so hazardous that they needed to create artificial threats just to maintain their survival instincts. Their literature and art celebrated violence and competition rather than harmony and cooperation. Human child-rearing practices involved deliberately exposing young humans to controlled dangers in order to teach survival skills. This was completely opposite to civilized species who protected their offspring from any possible harm until they were fully mature. The human approach suggested that their environment was so hostile that children needed combat training just to reach adulthood. The economic analysis revealed that human society was based on competition and resource scarcity rather than cooperation and abundance. They had never achieved the post-scarcity economy that most council species considered the foundation of true civilization. Instead, they seemed to thrive on the challenge of competing for limited resources and viewed economic struggle as a normal part of existence. Captain Zinara pointed out that humans had developed their advanced technology specifically to overcome the hostile conditions of their homeworld rather than to improve their quality of life. Their space program was designed to escape Earth's crushing gravity and lethal radiation rather than to explore the galaxy for knowledge or beauty. Their medical technology was focused on trauma surgery and disease resistance rather than life extension and enhancement. The final assessment was unanimous and terrifying. The Council was not dealing with a typical young species seeking membership. In galactic civilization, they were facing apex predators from a death world who possessed advanced technology, military capabilities, and a cultural foundation based on survival through violence and competition. The humans were not supplicants hoping for acceptance, but rather potential conquerors who might view the Council's peaceful civilization as prey rather than partners. Dr. Kethmore filed his official report with the recommendation that Earth be classified as a significant potential threat to galactic stability. The report noted that humans showed remarkable restraint in not having already conquered their local star system, but suggested that this restraint might be temporary. The Council faced the unprecedented challenge of deciding how to deal with a species that could potentially destroy galactic civilization, but might also be valuable allies if properly managed. The emergency session concluded with a unanimous agreement that the full Council needed to reconvene immediately to address this crisis. The emergency reconvening of the full Galactic Council created a level of tension that had not been felt in the Great Chamber for over 1,000 years. Representatives from 847 worlds gathered in unprecedented urgency to address what many were calling the greatest threat to galactic civilization since the ancient wars that had nearly destroyed half the galaxy. The usual ceremonial procedures were abbreviated as High Counselor Mordek called the session to order with obvious concern rippling through his metallic exoskeleton. The debate began immediately with three distinct factions emerging among the Council members, each with radically different ideas about how to handle the human situation. The chamber filled with the sounds of dozens of different communication methods as representatives argued passionately about the fate of both humanity and galactic civilization itself. The isolationist faction was led by High Counselor Mordek, himself along with several other senior members who had guided the Council through previous crises. They argued that humans represented an existential threat to the peaceful order that had taken millennia to establish and maintain. Mordek pointed out that human military doctrine included concepts that violated every principle of civilized warfare, and that their casual acceptance of massive casualties suggested they would not hesitate to destroy entire worlds if they felt threatened. The isolationists proposed immediate quarantine of the Sol system using automated defense platforms that would prevent human expansion beyond their home star. They argued that humans should be contained until they either evolved into a more peaceful species or destroyed themselves through their own violent tendencies. Several speakers noted that Deathworld species had historically either achieved true civilization by abandoning their aggressive instincts or had gone extinct through internal conflicts. Representative Kolthara from the Rigel system supported the isolationist position by pointing out that humans had already demonstrated their willingness to build planet-destroying weapons and distribute them among competing governments. She argued that any species capable of such decisions would inevitably use those weapons against external targets once they achieved interstellar travel capabilities. The risk to galactic civilization was simply too great to ignore. The integration faction was led by Ambassador Veltar, who had spent the most time with the human representatives and felt that complete isolation would only make them more dangerous in the long term. He argued that humans had shown remarkable restraint in not using their most destructive weapons against each other, and that this restraint might extend to their interactions with other species if they were properly integrated into galactic society. Veltar pointed out that humans had passed all the traditional tests of civilization and had demonstrated curiosity about other species rather than hostility toward them. He noted that their aggressive tendencies seemed to be directed primarily at environmental challenges and survival problems rather than at other intelligent beings. The Integration faction proposed offering humans full council membership with extensive cultural exchange programs designed to gradually modify their more dangerous tendencies. Dr. Silandra from the Centauri Medical Research Institute supported integration by arguing that human medical and survival technologies could benefit the entire galaxy. She pointed out that humans had solved biological and environmental problems that had challenged Council scientists for centuries, and that their unique perspective on survival might be valuable for dealing with external threats that the Council had never encountered. The military faction was led by Captain Zin Ara, who had initially been most concerned about human warfare capabilities, but had begun to see potential advantages in their military expertise. She argued that the galaxy was a dangerous place, despite the Council's best efforts to maintain peace, and that human combat experience might be exactly what was needed to deal with external threats that could challenge galactic civilization. Captain Zin Ara noted that the Council's peaceful approach to conflict resolution had worked well for internal disputes, but might not be sufficient against aggressive species from outside Council space. She pointed out that humans had developed military doctrines specifically designed to defeat superior forces using inferior technology, and that these capabilities could be invaluable if the galaxy ever faced invasion from unknown hostile civilizations. The military faction proposed offering humans a unique position as the Council's emergency response specialists, with responsibility for handling situations too dangerous for normal Council species to address. This would harness human capabilities for the benefit of galactic civilization, while providing them with appropriate challenges that would satisfy their apparent need for conflict and danger. As the debate continued, Park Hyun and Lee Nara remained in their visitor quarters, completely unaware that their casual descriptions of Earth culture had triggered the most important political crisis in galactic history. They spent their time examining the fascinating alien technologies they had been shown and discussing the remarkable diversity of life forms they had encountered. Park Hyun was particularly interested in the defensive systems that protected the station, while Lee Nara was fascinated by the biological adaptations that allowed different species to coexist in the same environment. The humans had prepared detailed reports for Earth describing the incredible opportunities that awaited humanity among the stars. They planned to recommend immediate expansion of Earth's space program and suggested that humans would be valuable contributors to galactic civilization through their unique perspectives on survival and adaptation. Neither of them suspected that the Council was debating whether to quarantine their entire species as a threat to galactic peace. After 12 hours of continuous debate, the Council reached a compromise that satisfied none of the factions completely, but provided a path forward that all could accept. The final decision was unprecedented in Council history and required the creation of entirely new protocols for dealing with a species that did not fit any existing categories. The Council voted to offer Earth full membership in galactic civilization, with the special designation of Emergency Response Specialists. Humans would be welcomed as equals and given access to all Council technologies and territories, but they would also be called upon to handle dangerous situations that exceeded the capabilities or risk tolerance of other species. This compromise acknowledged human capabilities while channeling them toward constructive purposes. The Emergency Response Specialist designation meant that humans would be the first choice for missions involving hostile environments, extreme conditions, or potential combat situations. They would serve as the Council's troubleshooters for problems that required the kind of survival instincts and risk acceptance that only Deathworld species possessed. In exchange, they would receive full Council support for their technological development and territorial expansion. High Counselor Mordek announced the decision to Park Hyun and Lee Nara in a formal ceremony that emphasized both the honor being bestowed upon humanity and the responsibilities that came with Council membership. The humans accepted graciously, and Park Hyun immediately asked if Earth could send additional representatives to help with what he called interesting challenges. Lee Nara inquired about opportunities for cross-species collaborative research projects. Ambassador Veltar filed his final report on the Human First Contact mission with observations that would become required reading for all future diplomatic personnel. He noted that humans had arrived at Council Station not as supplicants seeking acceptance into a larger civilization, but as curious tourists interested in new technologies and experiences. He concluded that the galaxy probably needed humanity, more than humanity needed the galaxy. The implications of the Council's decision rippled through galactic civilization as news of the human emergency response specialists spread to all member worlds. Some species expressed relief that dangerous situations would now be handled by beings specifically adapted for such challenges. Others worried about what it meant that the Council felt the need for such specialists in the first place. Captain Zinara began developing new training protocols that would allow human specialists to work effectively with Council military forces, without accidentally terrifying their alien colleagues. The challenge was significant because human standard operating procedures included tactics and strategies that most species found psychologically disturbing even when they understood the logical necessity. Dr. Kethamore established a new research program focused on understanding Deathworld adaptations and their potential applications for improving Council technology and survival capabilities. The program's first project involved studying human medical techniques that allowed them to survive injuries that would be instantly fatal to most species. As Park Hyun and Lee Nara prepared to return to Earth with news of humanity's acceptance into galactic civilization, the Council members began to realize that they had fundamentally changed the nature of their peaceful society. The introduction of Deathworld specialists meant acknowledging that the galaxy was more dangerous than they had wanted to admit, and that sometimes survival required capabilities that civilized beings preferred not to develop.